The colony of Nova Prime floated in the vast darkness of space, its towering skyscrapers glowing against the endless black. Families lived here, scientists worked, and children played beneath artificial skies. It was one of humanity's proudest achievements, a thriving world far beyond Earth's reach, a symbol of how far they had come. But on this night, Nova Prime would burn. It started without warning. The outermost defense satellites blinked offline one by one, silent and unseen. Deep in the command center, Lieutenant Erin Vasquez frowned at her console, tapping the screen as the sensors failed to respond. "Commander, I think we have a..." The words never finished. The alarm screamed. A dozen red markers flooded her display. Unidentified warships dropping out of FTL, just beyond the colony's orbit. Incoming vessels. No identification codes. Then the first blast hit. A streak of white-hot plasma slammed into Nova Prime's orbital station, tearing through its structure like paper. Hundreds of workers stationed there never had time to scream before the explosion ripped them into the void. On the planet's surface, the sky lit up in unnatural fire. Mothers and fathers looked up from their homes. Children pointed at the bright flashes in the sky, not yet understanding what they meant. Then the sirens began. Governor Elias North ran into the command bunker, his face pale. "What's happening?" he demanded. Erin's voice was tight with controlled panic. "We're under attack, sir. Unknown fleet. Our defenses." The room shook violently as something massive detonated in the upper atmosphere. Air already failing. Nova Prime's planetary shield flared against the bombardment, struggling to hold back the rain of destruction. Anti-air turrets spun to life, spitting energy blasts at the descending warships. The colony's defense fleet, only a fraction of what the core worlds had, scrambled to intercept. But the enemy was relentless. The defenders fought, but they were outnumbered. The sky turned into a graveyard of burning wreckage as human ships were torn apart one after another. In the capital city, families flowed into bunkers, clutching their loved ones. The streets filled with the deafening roar of explosions. A desperate voice cut through the command center speakers. "This is Captain Riz, UEF Destroyer Perseus. We're outgunned." There, his voice was drowned in static. Then silence. The Perseus was gone. Governor North gritted his teeth. How long can the shield hold? Erin's hands flew over her console. Not long. They're targeting the generator now. The governor exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the room. These people, his people, were looking to him for answers, for hope. But what hope was left? In the residential sector, 10-year-old Alex Carter huddled under a table, his little sister crying beside him. Their mother had run to get help and hadn't come back. The shaking hadn't stopped. Every explosion sent tremors through the ground, making the lights flicker. "Mom's coming back, right?" his sister whimpered. Alex squeezed her hand. "Yeah," he lied. A bright light flooded through the windows. Too bright. Alex turned just in time to see a wave of energy rushing toward them. He shut his eyes. The shield shattered. The ground quaked as the invaders unleashed their fury. High-rise buildings crumbled. Flames devoured the city. People ran, screamed, but there was nowhere left to go. Enemy dropships descended, deploying soldiers in black armor, their glowing visors cold and lifeless. They moved methodically, killing anything that resisted. In the command bunker, Erin's screen flickered. "They're jamming all outgoing signals. We can't." Governor North turned to his aide. "Get a message out. Any way you can." The aide hesitated. "But if they're jamming..." North grabbed him by the shoulders. "Try." Deep within the communications center, an engineer named Lion Torres worked furiously. The normal channels were blocked, but maybe, yes, a backup relay, barely functional. She set it to broadcast on all frequencies. The message would be fragmented, distorted, but it was their last chance. "This is Nova Prime. We are under attack. Repeat, we air." The door behind her exploded inward. A dark figure stepped through, weapon raised. Lion had just enough time to whisper, "Please," before a pulse of energy ended her words forever. Above the planet, the last of Nova Prime's defenders fell. The enemy fleet, unchallenged, turned their firepower downward. One final bombardment. In the bunker, Erin clutched her headset. No response. No one heard us. Governor North closed his eyes. He had failed them all. The last thing the people of Nova Prime saw was the sky, burning like the end of the world. 2 seconds. The signal was weak, barely more than static. But it was enough. Deep in the heart of Earth's military command, General Marcus Holloway stood frozen as the transmission played. The distorted voice crackled through the speakers, its message broken yet unmistakable. "This is Nova Prime. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Requesting IM." Then silence. The war room was deathly quiet. Officers and analysts exchanged grim glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Nova Prime was one of the most advanced human colonies, a beacon of progress. Now, it was gone. General Holloway exhaled slowly, his weathered hands clenched into fists. Who did this? Admiral Lyon Park, head of the United Earth Navy, tapped at her console. Pulling satellite data now. There. A massive fleet, larger than anything previously recorded, loomed in the holographic display. Unknown warships, sleek and deadly, had emerged from deep space and annihilated the colony with ruthless precision. There had been no declaration of war, no warning, just death. The President of Earth, Nathan Cole, sat at the head of the table, his face pale. Casualties. A grim-faced officer responded. Total. The colony was wiped out. Over 90 million souls. Gone. The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy fog. The attack had not been a mere skirmish. It was extermination. President Cole's voice was hoarse. Any survivors? Admiral Park hesitated. No confirmed reports. We lost contact before we could establish an evacuation. For a moment, the room was silent again, the enormity of the loss sinking in. Then General Holloway turned, his voice ice-cold. If they wanted a war, they just got one. The officers straightened. The air shifted. There was no debate, no hesitation. This was no time for diplomacy. The enemy had made their choice. Now, humanity would make theirs. Admiral Park's hands flew across her control pad, sending priority alerts across the fleet. Activate full-scale mobilization. I want every available warship prepped and ready for immediate deployment. How many ships? The President asked. She met his gaze, steel in her eyes. All of them. Across the Sol system, Earth's armada stirred. Warships stationed at Titan and Europa powered up their engines. Fleets on Mars and the Luna defense grid received the same order. From sleek destroyers to massive dreadnoughts, the call to arms rang through the void. In the depths of space, shipyards accelerated their production, constructing new vessels at a breakneck pace. AI systems calculated logistics, resupply chains, and battle strategies in real time. Humanity was not merely preparing for war. It was unleashing its full wrath. In a hangar bay, Captain Elias Carter of the battleship Warspite strapped himself into his command chair. His crew moved with purpose, silent and efficient. Every officer, every soldier, every pilot knew what had happened. None of them needed orders to feel the burning rage in their chests. This isn't just about revenge, Carter said to his crew, his voice carrying through the bridge. This is about survival. They think they can wipe us out. They think we'll kneel. They are wrong. Throughout the system, civilians watched in horror as the news spread. Families grieved. Fathers and mothers held their children close, whispering words of comfort that felt hollow. But amid the sorrow, a fire ignited. On Earth, thousands of young men and women flooded recruitment centers. Factories that once built civilian ships retooled their assembly lines for war. Retired veterans suited up once more, This was not just a military response. It was a civilization rising as one. A single message was broadcast across all of human space. Nova Prime has fallen. We will not forget. We will not forgive. The enemy came to end us. Now, we bring the war to them. Admiral Park stood before the war room's central display, a map of the stars before her. We're looking at total war, Mr. President. No negotiations, no peace talks. President Cole nodded, his expression dark. Then let's give them hell. General Holloway's voice rang through the chamber. Send the fleet. The order rippled through space like a shockwave. The largest armada in human history minus 700,000 warships lit their engines, turning toward the abyss. The enemy had started this war. Humanity would finish it. The vastness of space trembled as Earth's fleet surged forward, a tidal wave of steel and fire. From the Sol system's shipyards, moon bases, and deep space outposts, warships of every class mobilized. Fighters and bombers launched in formation. Dreadnoughts loomed like moving cities, and carriers brimmed with unrelenting firepower. Humanity had bled, and now it would make the stars burn. Captain Elias Carter stood at the bridge of the Warspite, his gaze locked on the massive fleet stretching beyond the viewport. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering. Never before had so many warships flown under a single banner. The darkness of space was alight with their thrusters, each ship a spear pointed toward vengeance. All ships report combat readiness, his second-in-command, Commander Lynn, announced. Carter nodded. Open fleet-wide comms. A slight crackle, then the voices of thousands of captains filled the channel, awaiting his words. He took a slow breath before speaking. We set out today not as individuals, not as separate ships or factions, but as one force, one people. The enemy thought they could erase us. Instead, they have united us. His voice was steel, unwavering. We go not just for revenge, but for justice, for the 90 million lives lost on Nova Prime, for the families left grieving, for every child who will never see their parents again. We bring them reckoning. A chorus of affirmations echoed across the fleet. Some cheered. Some sat in solemn silence. But all understood. There would be no surrender, no retreat. This war would be fought until the enemy was nothing but a dark memory in the void. The command came through. Jump to FTL. The fleet vanished in an instant, streaking into the abyss like a blade cutting across the cosmos. The enemy did not expect such a response. On the bridge of auxiliary battleship, Grand Admiral Vorsk studied the reports with a deepening scowl. The Exhilarating Empire had crushed countless civilizations before, reducing their worlds to ash. The attack on Nova Prime had been nothing more than a message, a warning to humanity to submit. They had anticipated fear, weakness, pleas for mercy. Instead, humanity answered with war. The Auxiliary had received their first reports just hours ago. Hundreds of thousands of warships, more than even the Auxiliary Imperial Navy had ever deployed, were now advancing with terrifying precision. It was impossible. No species had ever retaliated like this. One of his lieutenants hesitated before speaking. Grand Admiral, our forces are still regrouping from the Nova Prime strike. We were not prepared for. Vorsk's claws dug into the armrest of his throne-like chair. Silence. Tell me where they are heading. A tactical officer zoomed in on the galactic map. Based on their trajectory, they are moving toward the Varduk system. It is one of our forward bases, likely defended. A cold realization settled over the bridge. The humans were not just coming. They were coming fast. Vorsk's mandibles clicked together in frustration. He had underestimated them. No matter, he would correct that mistake. Mobilize all available fleets. Reinforce Varduk immediately. His voice was a growl, barely restrained fury beneath his calm tone. If humanity wants war, we shall give them a war they will never forget. Aboard the Warspite, Carter watched the star lines blur as they neared their first target. The enemy thought themselves untouchable. They would soon learn otherwise. Commander Lin checked the battle readiness report. Enemy fleet strength is unknown, but intelligence suggests Varduk is a key supply hub. Taking it out would cripple their logistics. Carter smiled coldly. Then we burn it to the ground. The fleet dropped out of FTL. Before them, the Varduk system lay still and unaware. The enemy had not expected them to strike so soon. That was their mistake. A new message was sent fleet-wide. For Nova Prime. And with that, humanity unleashed its fury. The void of space was silent, but the moment the human fleet emerged from FTL, the silence shattered. The Auxiliary Defense Station at Varduk barely had time to register the incoming ships before alarms blared across their networks. Unidentified fleet detected. Scanning. Impossible. It's the humans. On the command deck of the Auxiliary Battle Station, Overseer Calvarn stood frozen. He had received no warnings, no intelligence suggesting an attack this soon. His mandibles clicked in disbelief as he stared at the screen. Hundreds of thousands of human warships spread out like a storm, their weapons charged, their formations tight and disciplined. They had come prepared. They had come for war. Calvarn spun toward his officers. Activate planetary defenses. All warships to battle stations. Now. Across Varduk's orbit, Auxiliary defense turrets powered up, targeting systems scrambling to lock onto the incoming enemy. But it was too late. The humans had already fired. On the bridge of the Warspite, Captain Carter watched as the first wave of human missiles and railgun slugs cut through the blackness of space, streaking toward their targets at impossible speeds. The Auxiliary's outer defenses lit up in fiery explosions as the impacts tore through them like paper. Admiral Lyon Park's voice rang across the fleet's open comms. All ships, engage at will. The battle began. Dreadnoughts unleashed broadside salvos, their railguns hammering enemy warships before they could even return fire. Fighter squadrons weaved through the chaos, their pulse cannons shredding enemy turrets and interceptors. The void turned into a graveyard as debris and wreckage drifted, marking the first casualties of war. But the Auxiliary were no cowards. Surviving warships regrouped, their massive energy cannons charging before returning fire. Blue plasma streaked across the battlefield, smashing into human destroyers and corvettes. The shields held, barely, but the battle was far from over. Carter gritted his teeth as the Warspite took a glancing hit to its port side. The ship rumbled, warning lights flashing, but the damage was manageable. They're regrouping, Commander Lin called out. They're trying to form a defensive perimeter around the planet. Carter's eyes narrowed. Then we break through it. Down on Varduk, panic spread like wildfire. The colony was a strategic hub, housing supply depots, weapons caches, and military training centers. It had never been touched by war, until now. Civilians ran for shelters as the orbital bombardment began. Massive kinetic rods, dropped from high orbit, impacted the ground with the force of nuclear warheads. Enemy bunkers collapsed. Supply lines were obliterated. The Auxiliary had built this world for conquest. Now it was burning. On the Auxiliary command station, Calvarn's hands trembled. The battle was slipping from his grasp. A lieutenant turned to him, desperation in his eyes. "Sir, our forces are being decimated. The humans. There are too many of them." Calvarn knew what had to be done. There was no salvaging this battle. He gritted his teeth. "Order all remaining ships to retreat. Abandon Varduk." "Sir, we can't hold this position. If we stay, we die." Across the system, artillery ships broke formation, their engines flaring as they prepared for emergency jumps. Some managed to escape. Others were not so lucky. Human warships, moving with ruthless efficiency, hunted them down. Within hours, it was over. The human fleet held position over the burning remains of Varduk. On the bridge of the Warspite, Carter let out a slow breath. It had been a massacre. The Auxiliary had never expected humanity to strike with such ferocity. Commander Lin turned. "Orders." Carter glanced at the wreckage below, then at the remaining fleet reports. The first battle had been won, but it was only the beginning. He activated the fleet-wide comms. This was for Nova Prime. But we are not done. His voice was steady, unwavering. We will push forward. We will strike them again and again, until there is nothing left. Silence. Then, one by one, the captains of the human fleet responded with a single word. Aye. The war had only just begun. The fall of Vardok sent shockwaves through the Xilari Empire. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they had lost a critical stronghold, not to a fractured rebellion or an inferior race begging for mercy, but to humanity, a species they had dismissed as weak. Now, the humans were coming again. Grand Admiral Vorsk stood in the heart of the Imperial War Chamber, staring at the galactic map as human forces continued their relentless advance. Red indicators flashed across the holographic display, marking system after system that had fallen under human assault. The Council of Lords, the ruling elite of the Xilari Empire, sat before him. Their expressions ranged from fury to barely concealed fear. How did this happen? One of the lords demanded. You said the humans were insignificant. Vorsk's claws dug into his palm. I was mistaken. The words tasted bitter. He had expected resistance. He had expected some casualties. What he had not expected was the sheer scale of humanity's vengeance. The humans were not fighting for conquest. They were fighting for retribution. And that made them more dangerous than any empire that Xilari had crushed before. On the bridge of the Warspite, Captain Elias Carter studied the next phase of the war. Intelligence reports indicated that the Xilari were mustering a last stand at the system of Sareth Prime, one of their military capitals. They're consolidating their fleets, Commander Lin reported. Looks like they're finally taking us seriously. Carter's lips curled into a grim smile. Good. Let them gather. It'll save us the trouble of hunting them down. Across the fleet, preparations were underway. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair damaged warships. Crews resupplied ammunition, restocked fuel cells, and prepared for the next battle. And throughout the Armada, a single message spread. This was it. The battle that would decide the fate of the war. The humans had come this far, and they would not turn back now. Deep within the Xoreth Prime system, the Xilari fleet awaited. Grand Admiral Vorsk stood aboard the Harbinger of Dominance, the pride of the Imperial Navy. Around him, hundreds of Xilari warships took formation. Cruisers, destroyers, and dreadnoughts aligned in tight battle lines, their weapons primed and ready. The Xilari would not run. Not this time. Final fleet check, Vorsk commanded. A chorus of confirmations came through. Every available warship in the Empire had been called to this battle. If they failed here, there would be no more defenses between humanity and the Xilari homeworlds. Vorsk exhaled slowly. He had underestimated humanity once. He would not make that mistake again. Then the alarms blared. Admiral, human fleet incoming. They'd dropped out of FTL, directly in front of us. The battle had begun. From the bridge of the Warspite, Carter stared at the massive Xilari armada before them. Thousands of enemy warships filled the void, their formations rigid, their weapons gleaming. This was the largest fleet that Xilari had ever assembled, and it was not enough. Target all enemy dreadnoughts, Carter ordered. Send in the first wave. The human fleet surged forward. Railguns thundered. Plasma beams cut through the blackness of space. Fighter squadrons weaved through enemy defenses, unleashing devastation. The Xilari fought back with everything they had. Massive energy cannons fired, tearing through human cruisers. Explosions lit up the void as ships on both sides fell. But the humans did not break. For every warship lost, another pressed forward. For every pilot shot down, 10 more took their place. The Xilari had expected a battle of attrition. They had not expected the unyielding fury of an entire species that refused to be stopped. Carter's voice echoed across the fleet-wide comms. Push through. We end this today." The human fleet obeyed. They punched through the auxiliary defenses, closing the distance, taking the fight to the heart of the enemy's lines. For the auxiliary, the battle was turning into a slaughter. And then, in the chaos, a single auxiliary officer made a desperate decision. A distress signal was sent, not to their allies, not to their reinforcements, but to humanity. A plea for surrender. "You said." The transmission came through the moment the tide of battle had turned irreversibly against the auxiliary. The mighty empire, once feared across the stars, was crumbling before the relentless advance of humanity. Captain Elias Carter stood on the bridge of the Warships, watching as the enemy fleet disintegrated under human firepower. Auxiliary warships exploded one after another, their formations shattered, their defenses crumbling. And then, the battle suddenly halted. "Sir," Commander Lin called out, his voice laced with disbelief, "we're receiving an open-channel transmission. It's coming from the auxiliary flagship." Carter narrowed his eyes. "Put it through." The view screen flickered, revealing Grand Admiral Vorsk, the once proud auxiliary commander who had led countless conquests, now looked defeated. His golden eyes burned with humiliation, but his voice carried something else, something Carter had never expected to hear from auxiliary. "We surrender." Silence filled the bridge. Carter studied the alien before him. The auxiliary had given humanity no mercy when they attacked the colony, when they slaughtered civilians without hesitation. And now, when they faced extinction, they begged for it. A part of him wanted to refuse. A part of him wanted to finish what they had started, to make them feel the pain humanity had endured. He turned to his crew. The same thought burned in their eyes. But vengeance and justice were not the same. Carter exhaled. "Stand down." The word sent a ripple through the human fleet. The guns that had torn through the enemy just moments ago fell silent. The auxiliary, beaten and broken, awaited their fate. Vorsk's voice was rough. "What will you do with us?" Carter leaned forward. "You thought humanity was weak. You thought you could massacre us without consequence. Today, you've learned how wrong you were." Vorsk's expression remained rigid, but his mandibles tightened. He knew. The entire auxiliary species knew. They had made a fatal mistake. Carter continued, "Your empire will never threaten us again. You will disband your military. You will surrender your conquered worlds. You will answer for what you've done." Vorsk's head lowered slightly. He did not argue. He could not argue. Humanity had won. In the aftermath of the war, the galaxy changed forever. News of the auxiliary surrender spread across every star system. The once dominant empire, the species that had ruled for centuries through fear, was no more. Their warships were dismantled. Their territories were liberated. And humanity. Humanity had proven itself not just as warriors, but as something greater. They had come in fury. They had fought with unbreakable resolve. But when the enemy begged for mercy, they had chosen restraint. Because true strength was not in destruction. It was in knowing when to stop. And now, the galaxy would never forget.